Muammar Muhammad Abu Manya al-Gaddafi was born in a tent in the deserts of Tripolitania on June 7, 1942, in a village near Sirte in western Libya. The youngest of 4 children and the only son to Aisha bin Niran and Muhammad Abdul Salam bin Hamad bin Muhammad, Muammar Gaddafi was born into a nomadic Bedouin family of Arab descent. They were poor and subsisted by herding camels and goats. His early life and family history were subject to the adverse effects of colonization, which played a significant role in shaping his worldview. Before his birth, his paternal grandfather was killed during the Italian invasion in 1911. When he was born, Libya was an Italian colony and hosted many major events throughout the desert campaigns of World War II. We will show you life in Libya before Gaddafi so that we can understand together what we are talking about here. Life in Libya under Italian colonial rule was marked by hardship and struggle, lasting from 1911 until the end of World War II in 1943. During this period, Libyans endured numerous conflicts and challenges in their fight for independence and freedom, and the socio-economic impacts on the Libyan population were significant. In 1911, Italy invaded Libya, which was then part of the Ottoman Empire. This invasion initiated a prolonged period of resistance against Italian occupation, led by Libyan tribes and notable figures such as Omar Mukhtar. Mukhtar became a symbol of resistance, leading guerrilla warfare against Italian forces until his capture and execution in 1931, which significantly weakened organized resistance. During the colonial period, Italy implemented settlement policies aimed at strengthening its control over Libya. Thousands of Italian settlers were brought to Libya and given fertile lands, resulting in the displacement of many Libyans from their ancestral lands. These policies aimed to strengthen the Italian presence and increase control over the Libyan economy. The Italian authorities imposed discriminatory policies against Libyans, restricting their access to education, employment, and social services. Additionally, Italy attempted to suppress Libyan culture and replace it with Italian culture, including the imposition of the Italian language and the removal of Libyan national symbols. The Italian authorities established internment camps for the Libyan population, where they were subjected to mistreatment and forced labor. These camps were part of a repressive strategy aimed at breaking the Libyan resistance and forcing the population into submission. During the campaign against the Libyan resistance, Italian forces destroyed many villages and infrastructure in rural areas, leading to the displacement of local populations and exacerbating economic and social conditions. Despite the repressive policies, Italy did undertake some development and infrastructure projects in Libya, such as building roads, bridges, and public institutions. However, these projects often served the interests of Italian settlers and supported colonial control more than improving the lives of Libyans. World War II brought further turmoil to Libya, turning it into a major battleground between Allied and Axis forces. After Italy's defeat in the war, British and French forces took control of Libya until the end of the conflict. Following the war, Libya came under the administration of the United Nations, which paved the way for steps toward independence. On December 24, 1951, Libya became an independent kingdom under King Idris I, who led the country in the post-colonial period. During his reign, King Idris attempted to develop the country gradually, relying heavily on foreign aid and the oil revenues that began to flow in the early 1960s. Despite some economic improvements, corruption and inequality persisted, causing growing discontent among the youth and military elites. This way, we have understood the political life in Libya during Gaddafi's upbringing. Now, let's return to his life once again. Education was not free, and Gaddafi's family was poor. Nevertheless, Muammar was sent to school. He was a hard-working child and recognized the financial strain that his schooling brought on his family. He applied himself and advanced 6 grades in only 4 years. During the evenings, he would sleep on the floor of a mosque, and on the weekends, he would walk 20 miles to visit his grandparents. Following his success at the primary school level, Gaddafi was enrolled in a secondary school, which was a luxury neither of his parents had received. His family moved to south-central Libya, where his father worked as a caretaker for a tribal leader. While at school, Gaddafi was exposed to many ideologies, and many of his teachers were Egyptian. He found great respect for the Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser and sympathized with his beliefs and policies. Gaddafi emerged from his schooling with solid political views and supported the ideas of Arab nationalism and socialism. He rejected the ideas of colonialism, neo-colonialism, Western imperialism, and Zionism. Gaddafi became politically active, and in October 1961, he led a demonstration against Syria's secession from the United Arab Republic. In 1963, Muammar Gaddafi joined the military and started training at the Royal Military Academy. He was deeply unhappy with the British influence, and while working within the military, he started organizing a revolutionary group called the Central Committee of the Free Officers Movement. In 1966, he was assigned special signals training in England. He also learned English during this time. He later stated that he disliked England, and his experience made him realize the value of his own country's culture. King Idris' rule had become deeply unpopular in Libya throughout the 1960s. Corruption had weakened his leadership, and Arab nationalism was on the rise. Libyan people started objecting to the pro-Western stance of the government, and riots broke out in Tripoli and Benghazi. Following the defeat of Egypt in the Six-Day War, many Libyans sympathized with Egypt, and protests in solidarity with Egypt became widespread. There were various revolutionary groups in the military, and the CIA suspected that there would be a coup attempt. They did not, however, expect it to come from Muammar Gaddafi's Free Officers Movement. While the king was abroad, Gaddafi launched his plan, occupying airports, police stations, government offices, and other key installations. They met little resistance in what later became known as the 1 September Revolution. Crown Prince Saeed Hassan Rida al-Mahdi as Sanusi was arrested and forced to relinquish government control. In its place, Gaddafi proclaimed the Libyan Arab Republic and emphasized freedom, socialism, and unity. The next few years saw Gaddafi consolidating his power. The Central Committee of the Free Officers Movement became the Revolutionary Command Council, RCC, which immediately began purging the government of monarchists. His early rule was fraught with danger, and in 1970, Gaddafi survived 2 coup attempts. On April 16, 1973, Gaddafi launched the Popular Revolution, which was similar in aims to the Cultural Revolution in China. He created an ideology called the Third International Theory as the basis for the Popular Revolution. In this ideology, he rejected both the United States and the Soviet Union as being imperialist and proposed an Islamic super-state of Third World countries to guide Islam against the imperialist activities of its enemies. Despite this, he retained much better ties with the Soviet Union than with the United States. Gaddafi wrote his ideology down in his Green Book, in 3 short volumes that outlined the beliefs and policies to guide Libya and the Libyan people. Not everybody was happy, however. Increased spending on foreign aid angered many who were close to him in the RCC. One of his colleagues in the RCC, Umar Maheshi, along with a few others, began plotting a coup against Gaddafi in 1974. In 1975, their plot was uncovered, and Maheshi fled while many of his co-conspirators were arrested and executed. The military was then targeted and purged of anti-revolutionary elements. Protests also erupted as anti-Gaddafist students clashed with police and pro-Gaddafist students, while privately owned Islamic colleges and universities were shut down in an attempt to control religion in the country and eradicate conservative anti-Gaddafist clerics from office. During this time, complex foreign relations saw Gaddafi falling out with Egypt and finding new friends in Uganda, under Idi Amin, Pakistan, and Zaire. In 1973, Israel shot down Libyan Arab Airlines Flight 114, which strayed into Israeli airspace during a sandstorm. Gaddafi blamed Egypt for not doing more to prevent the disaster. He also blamed Egypt for not including Libya in the planning for the 1973 Yom Kippur War. In 1977, Gaddafi dissolved the Libyan Arab Republic and replaced it with the Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, which was officially a direct democracy. Although the government worked hard to provide amenities to all Libyans, especially with housing, many civil liberties were stripped, and the media came under the direct control of the revolution. The Cultural Revolution focused on several key aspects. Educational reform. Gaddafi reformed the educational system to promote national identity and Arab Islamic values. Schools began teaching the principles of the Green Book, which included Gaddafi's views on direct democracy, socialist economy, and a Jamahiriya, state of the masses, society. Curricula were altered to reflect national values and traditional Libyan culture. Promotion of Arabic language and culture. Gaddafi aimed to strengthen the Arabic language, making it the sole official language of the country. The use of foreign languages in education, administration, and business was reduced. Additionally, traditional Libyan arts and culture, including music, poetry, and literature, were promoted as part of national identity. Dismantling tribal structures. To foster national unity and eliminate tribal divisions, Gaddafi sought to undermine the traditional tribal structures that played a significant role in Libyan society. People were encouraged to identify with people's congresses instead of tribes. Jamahiriya political system. Gaddafi tried to implement a political system based on direct democracy, where decisions were made by people's congresses and people's committees. This system aimed to empower the people to govern directly without intermediaries, aligning with the philosophy of the Green Book. Women's liberation. Gaddafi encouraged women's participation in public, political, and economic life. Policies were adopted to improve women's rights and provide them with equal opportunities in education, employment, and political participation. Socialist economy. Many key economic sectors, including oil and banking, were nationalized to redistribute wealth more equitably among Libyans. These steps were part of Gaddafi's attempt to create a socialist economy based on self-sufficiency and fair wealth distribution. While the Cultural Revolution brought some improvements, such as higher education rates and strengthened national identity, it also faced widespread criticism. Many Libyans felt that the political system based on people's congresses was ineffective and that real power remained concentrated in Gaddafi's hands and those of his inner circle. Moreover, the repressive policies and human rights violations led to growing discontent and opposition. In summary, the Cultural Revolution was an effort by Gaddafi to reshape Libyan society according to his vision. However, its outcomes were mixed, and its impact was limited by the authoritarianism and repression that characterized his regime. The early 1980s were marked by an economic downturn in Libya, as the oil price crashed and revenues were slashed. Gaddafi struggled to maintain his security after a series of failed military interventions and the hardline approach taken by the new Reagan administration, which openly provoked conflict with Libya. The US held military exercises in the Gulf of Sirte on the border of Libyan territory and ended up shooting down 2 Libyan jets. The US then threw many accusations of connections to bombings, assassinations, and even attempts to assassinate Ronald Reagan. None of these accusations were ever proven beyond a doubt. The US military again held military drills in the Gulf of Sirte, and this time they sunk 2 Libyan vessels. After the US accused Gaddafi of the 1986 bombing of a disco in Berlin, the US decided to launch airstrikes into Libya, which killed over 100 people, including Gaddafi's adopted daughter. After the terrorist attacks that included the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, in 1988 and the bombing of Uta Flight 772 over Niger in 1989, Libyan agents were accused of involvement. Following these events, the United Nations Security Council imposed sanctions on Libya in 1992. These sanctions included an air travel ban, an arms embargo, and a freeze on Libyan assets abroad, leading to significant economic and political isolation for Libya. Libya, under Gaddafi's rule, was significantly affected by these sanctions. The country's economy deteriorated, leading to increased unemployment and inflation. Gaddafi attempted to mitigate these difficulties by focusing on enhancing economic self-sufficiency, but he struggled to improve the economic situation due to international isolation and structural issues within the Libyan economy. Domestically, Gaddafi continued to suppress any political opposition with severity. Islamic and political opposition movements were brutally repressed, with opponents facing arrest, torture, and forced disappearances. Gaddafi utilized internal security apparatuses to monitor and intimidate the population, making any open opposition to his regime nearly impossible. Despite these challenges, Gaddafi sought to improve his relations with some African and Arab countries during the 1990s. He invested in numerous African nations and provided financial support to various governments and groups to expand his influence on the continent and garner political support. Additionally, he aimed to promote Arab unity and support Arab causes on the international stage. In the late 1990s, Gaddafi began taking steps to improve Libya's relations with the West. In 1999, Libya handed over 2 suspects in the Lockerbie bombing to stand trial in the Netherlands under Scottish law, leading to the suspension of some international sanctions. Gaddafi also started cooperating with the international community on counter-terrorism and non-proliferation of weapons initiatives. Gaddafi announced that Libya would abandon its weapons of mass destruction programs, including nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. This declaration allowed international inspectors to enter Libya and inspect its facilities. As a result of these moves, international sanctions against Libya were gradually lifted, allowing the country to re-enter the global community. Libya's relations with Western countries, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, improved. These countries reopened their embassies in Tripoli, and Western companies began investing in Libya's oil sector once again. Economically, Libya benefited from the rise in global oil prices, leading to increased government revenues. Gaddafi implemented some economic reforms to attract foreign investment and improve infrastructure. Certain sectors of the economy, including telecommunications and banking, were modernized, but corruption and cronyism continued to impede substantial economic progress. On February 15, 2011, the city of Benghazi, Libya's second-largest city, began to simmer with unrest after the arrest of a lawyer representing families of victims of the 1996 Abu Salim prison massacre. This arrest sparked the long-simmering anger among Libyans against Muammar Gaddafi's regime, which had ruled the country with an iron fist for over 4 decades. Inspired by the revolutions in neighboring Tunisia and Egypt, where the people successfully overthrew their authoritarian rulers, the Libyans took to the streets. The protests in Benghazi started as peaceful demonstrations demanding political and social reforms, but the calls quickly escalated to demands for Gaddafi's ouster. The regime was unyielding, with security forces using excessive force to disperse the demonstrators, resulting in numerous deaths and injuries. This brutal response only fueled the anger and escalated the protests. By late February, the protests had spread to other cities, including Tripoli, Misrata, Zawiya, and Al-Baida. During this time, many soldiers and officers in the Libyan army defected and joined the protesters, transforming the demonstrations into an armed uprising. In Benghazi, the rebels managed to take control of the city and expel the pro-Gaddafi security forces. On February 27, 2011, the National Transitional Council (NTC) was formed in Benghazi, representing the political leadership of the rebels and leading their efforts to overthrow the regime. The NTC garnered widespread popular support and announced its goal of building a democratic state that respected human rights and ensured social justice. As each day passed, Gaddafi's regime struggled to maintain control, using security forces and loyalist militias to suppress the uprising. Despite these efforts, rebel forces succeeded in taking control of large swathes of the country, including most of the eastern and western regions. Fierce battles ensued between the two sides, resulting in significant casualties and widespread destruction. The escalating situation prompted international intervention to protect Libyan civilians. In March 2011, the the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1973, imposing a no-fly zone over Libya and authorizing all necessary measures to protect civilians. NATO led military operations, which included airstrikes on pro-Gaddafi forces, significantly shifting the conflict's momentum in favor of the rebels. In August 2011, rebel forces entered the capital city of Tripoli, dealing a critical blow to Gaddafi's regime. After intense fighting, Gaddafi and members of his family and inner circle fled to his hometown of Sirte, where battles continued until October 20, 2011. On that day, Gaddafi was captured and killed by NTC forces. October 20th marked a historic day, not only for witnessing the end of Gaddafi's rule but also for beginning a new chapter in Libya's history. The streets were filled with people celebrating the end of decades of tyranny and oppression, but the joy was mixed with uncertainty about the future. The fall of Gaddafi opened the door to a new era fraught with challenges, as Libya found itself in a state of chaos and instability. The central authority disintegrated, and numerous armed factions emerged, vying for power and influence, leading to ongoing conflict and violence that profoundly impacted civilians' lives and the country's infrastructure. In the years following the revolution, Libya struggled to build democratic and transitional institutions but faced many obstacles. Conflicts among various factions continued, leading to repeated international and local interventions. Despite efforts to achieve stability, Libya remains politically and security unstable to this day.